On average, more games end with the killer getting 3 or 4 kills than 1 or 2. So that means Dead by Daylight is killer-sided, right? Not quite. Dead by Daylight has one of the most unique player bases, and by unique, I mean 2 sides that hate one another and feel as if the game caters to the other side. The reality is, both sides get nerfed and both sides get buffed, but each change seems dramatic because you equate the changes to your own experiences. If you log on to play Survivor and lose against Freddy 5 times in a row, buffing Freddy might seem confusing to you, but that's because you're projecting your own experiences on others. Dead by Daylight isn't killer-sided. Dead by Daylight isn't survivor-sided. You're simply falling victim to the anecdotal fallacy.
What?
The anecdotal fallacy occurs when somebody uses their own personal experiences to draw a broad conclusion or generalization, rather than relying on evidence or logical reasoning. And you can go on Dead by Daylight Twitter and see hundreds of examples of people falling victim to this logical fallacy in no time at all. When Hens posted on Twitter saying he wanted syringes removed from the game, it sparked quite the controversy, and almost every single person in this discourse fell victim to the anecdotal fallacy. Let's start with Hens, who's arguably the most qualified person to speak on this topic. He plays both killer and survivor, he has thousands of hours in Dead by Daylight, and he's experienced Dead by Daylight at a competitive level where players try to optimize every little bit of the game. So does that mean Hens is right by saying syringes should be removed from the game? No. Does it mean he's wrong? Also no. Hens' perspective is one of the top 1% of players in Dead by Daylight. And although his statement might be true in his experience, it may not be true for others, which is why we see such an insane discourse from Hens' proposal. Let's insert the perspective of another person. Let's just call him Chris. Chris just started playing Dead by Daylight. He plays Survivor and really struggles to escape from the killer because, let's face it, Survivor is difficult when you first start playing the game. He still doesn't know what half the killers do. He isn't familiar with any of the maps yet. He just runs to hide anytime he's in the killer's terror radius. For Chris, he has only about 4 syringes saved up. He's tried to use them a few times, but only once was he able to do it successfully. He almost never sees anyone else in his lobby bringing syringes. And for that reason, Chris thinks the idea of getting rid of syringes is dumb because they're hard to use and hard to get. Is Chris wrong? No, not at his experience level, but is he right? Also no. Now, there's hundreds of people involved in this discourse outside of Hens and Chris, but do you see where I'm going with this? There's absolutely no way to be certain about these kinds of things. The only way to make a definitive statement is by having data to back it up, which would be really hard to test. You would basically have to run 100 matches where survivors didn't have syringes, and then compare it to 100 matches where survivors did have syringes. You'd have to look at the difference in results, and then after that, you'd have to run the same test on other ultra rare add-ons to see if the benefits were similar. It's a damn near impossible experiment to run because the killer would have to behave the exact same in all the games in order to get a definite conclusion. Not even the devs would be able to pull off this kind of experiment, but do you know who has the most data to speak on these issues? Technically, the devs. I know, such a terrible take to say the devs would probably be able to bring the most logical argument to the table, but sadly it's true. They have access to data that we unfortunately don't, but that's not saying experienced players like Hens don't have valid ideas to improve the game. I think it's good Hens brought this topic up. I also think it's good that people bring their opinions into the argument. I'm just wondering why everyone speaks with such certainty, because the reality is nobody has any data to back up what they're saying. I recently posted a poll on my YouTube channel asking if the game was killer or survivor-sided. With over 3,500 votes, 21% of people said it was killer-sided, 28% of people said it was balanced, and 52% of people said it was survivor-sided. Look at that data. That means the game is in fact survivor-sided. That's if you ignore the fact that my audience is mainly made up of killer mains. Think of every game you play as an input. The most memorable inputs are most likely going to be the negative ones. Being slugged by a killer and bled out, being camped on hook, being flashbanged and teabagged by bully squads, getting gen rushed early in a match. Even watching a YouTuber experience these things could be considered an input. The more inputs you have, the more likely you are to develop a conclusion in your head about how the game is. If you play against a bully squad every time you log into the game, and then you go on YouTube and watch 2 hours of videos where killers fight back against bully squads, you might begin to assume that that's just how the game is. Killers have it unfair because survivors can just mess around with them the entire match. But you'd be wrong to assume that's everyone's experience. When it comes to whether the game is killer or survivor-sided, it's just a lot more complex than one or the other. What do we even mean when we say killer or survivor-sided? Are we talking about at the absolute peak MMR when you have with tens of thousands of hours in the game, do they get to determine whether the game is killer or survivor-sided? Are we talking about how the game plays for the greatest amount of people? Because I think we can all admit the game plays a lot differently when you play with friends as survivor compared to when you play alone. The game plays a lot differently the higher you go up in MMR compared to when you first start. I don't think it's unreasonable to conclude it probably changes a lot throughout someone's journey in the game. Here's my honest opinion on whether the game is killer or survivor-sided. And mind you, I said opinion because I have no data here to back it up. Just my experiences. I believe when you first start playing the game feels more killer-sided. There's a lot of different killers in the game, and because you might see a new one every game, it takes a minute to figure out what each killer does. I remember when I was new, I played against a doctor, and I lost. So I went on YouTube to learn how to counter him, but I didn't run into another doctor for a couple weeks. By that point, I had already forgotten how to counter doctor. That's an experience I had for a lot of killers, and I wouldn't be surprised if this has happened to other people too. As a new survivor, I also really didn't understand how to loop. I had no idea what the concept of 3-genning was, and I didn't know how to work with others efficiently. At the beginning, it definitely feels, keyword feels, killer-sided in my own experience. As I've gotten more experienced, it definitely feels more balanced. I'm not gonna say it feels survivor-sided, but I will say I've gone up against a Swift that's just so efficient and so good. It feels like there's nothing you can do as a killer to win. But does that mean the game is survivor-sided though? No, I just don't think that's productive to say. So why even make this video? I feel like somebody just needs to come out and say it. Stop being so damn confident that you're right. There's no need to go to war over a position you have. Just kindly drop your experience on the matter and move on. This whole killer-sided, survivor-sided fight is just kind of played out, and it seems like every time one buff or nerf idea is brought up, the opposing side will bring up 5 different things they also want nerfed or buffed on the other side. It just doesn't seem productive, and if you only play one side, whether it's survivor or killer, I'd really push you to take like a month and play the other side because it really does give you a better perspective on things. And it's way more fun to play that way. Walter, is the game killer or survivor-sided? Huh? So hopefully I've proven this game isn't killer-sided. Hopefully I've proven this game isn't survivor-sided. The experience is just vastly different for different people. So before you go on Twitter, remember, unless you're bringing hard data, you're simply falling victim to the anecdotal fallacy. No-ed may be the dumbest perk to you because you've gotten killed multiple times this week from it, but it doesn't mean the killer player who uses no-ed and still struggles in the endgame feels the same way. So let's stop the arguments and focus on the more important issues, like the non-stop grind of Dead by Daylight that I go over in this video right here.